Hey, welcome back. What a wonderful, beautiful film. And we have the privilege of having an opportunity to have a fireside chat, and we'll take your questions too. But before that, let's welcome back Ema Ryan Yamazaki on the stage. Sharing this beautiful film. And to moderate this session, we have the pleasure of having Kemy Monahan. She's the State Department officer who served for 30 years as a career diplomat, having had 16 assignments across 4 continents. But most relevantly in this context, she was until last year the Deputy Chief of Mission in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, working with Ambassador Rahm Emanuel. Some of your visas may have been issued under her guidance. That's number one. And number two, she was, before her diplomatic career, she was in Fukui Prefecture as a JET program, Japan Exchange and Teaching program. And so she was an English teacher in Japanese schools, middle school, high school, elementary?
Middle school and
middle school and high school. So she knows this context at the secondary level. So she's the perfect person to have moderate this discussion. Please join me in welcoming Kemy Monahan to run the session.
Thanks so much, and what a turnout, of course. This was such a powerful documentary, so impressive. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I have so many questions, and I know everyone else does too. I'm also drawing a tear from my eye because it's so moving. I mean, really, really an exceptional film. You were able to get behind the curtain in one of these schools that even the parents don't get inside, right? Unless they're also at school. So it's just fantastic. Could you start by telling us why you decided to do this film, your background? And then also I'm very interested in, it seems to be geared toward foreigners or non-Japanese. So I'm interested in what kinds of messages you wanted to say.
Sure. So I went to a Japanese public elementary school, much like the one I filmed at. I grew up in Osaka, not Tokyo, but otherwise, again, over 98% of people who grow up in Japan go to a public school, and the public school system is so uniform that, of course, people can say there's like rural, urban differences, and if there's the scale of the school could make a little bit of a difference, but the system is very like uniform and very steady. And so when I see these kids, I see myself in all the kids. I see my previous teachers and the teachers I chose to film. So it's very much kind of based on my memories of also going through the system. What's different kind of for me is my father is British. And so part of that led me to, from middle school, go to an international school in Japan for middle and high school. And then eventually I figured out I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I moved to New York City for college, and I spent almost a decade in New York. So after 12 years old, I became less and less, quote unquote, Japanese in kind of my telling of it. And I think especially when I found myself as a young adult in New York, starting my career as an assistant editor, being like a working person, I was just doing what I thought was expected. And people would be like, you're so hardworking, you're so responsible, you're always on time, you're so good at teamwork. And I got a lot of compliments. And I felt like this wasn't about me. It was somehow just being Japanese that was giving me these kind of like benefits in a way. And I started to think about how I became like this. And I think when I looked back, I realized that all the things I thought were normal, like the things you're taught in elementary school, beyond just the academics, kind of what I feature in the film, I realized how kind of special it was in a way, or it gave me the foundation of what it is to work hard, and the rewards of, accomplishing something as a team. And these things were embedded in me. And I also realized that it's not the case in other countries. Not the school systems are different around the world. And my American new friends were very confused by me telling them I was like, the minister of cleaning, like in my 5th grade class, like Soji Daiji, people were like, that's so crazy. So I realized maybe as I kind of spent more time in the US, and I appreciated all the other ways Japan was being like received, especially in the US, where there was our sushi or our ramen or ninjas or our baseball, and of course, anime, I was like, there's other ways to, I think, try to capture the essence of especially modern Japan and where we might be headed. And so this was the big reason behind wanting to do this project. I just thought it was, again, the way to kind of reveal something in a way that at least I hadn't seen done before. And yes, in a way, like here we are, at Stanford, the film, for sure, with English subtitles. I try to make the film, like, I went back to Japan to make films about Japan to share with the world. But what has happened, I realized, both with this film and also my previous film about Japanese high school baseball, in doing so, people in Japan also seem to gain some new insight by my interpretation of it. So I think, both, I'm kind of now trying to do both, where I kind of share different hints of why Japan is the way it is abroad, but in doing so, trying to provide some sort of conversation starter within Japan, which I think definitely happened for this film as well.
You are so uniquely qualified to talk about both worlds, right? And help us understand how they fit together. There were so many aha moments for me in the film, different things. One of the things I was thinking about is the fact that sometimes Westerners see Japan education as very rigid and almost little robots doing things. And the vulnerabilities that you brought out in these people, the insights on the teachers. I was just talking to one of the students about how the students don't realize how dedicated, right? How dedicated these teachers are and how vulnerable they are. And the teachers are crying. And this is all just for Westerner unbelievable. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Western view of everyone is the same and the nail that sticks out gets batted down, when it's clearly not the case with you. You came out of that system, and look at all the innovation, and look at, you're not a robot. You're creating these, unique and wonderful things. What would you say to Westerners about stereotypes?
Yeah, I remember, so as has been mentioned before this film, when I made the high school baseball film KOSHIEN, Japan's Field of Dreams, and it was on ESPN, the biggest reaction on Twitter was like, I didn't realize Japanese people cry. Like, this is like, because in my baseball film, a lot of like kids are crying, the adults are crying, there's a lot of crying. And I just felt like and this was, again, I feel like, every decade things change. It was almost 8 years ago. And I think like this idea of like a cold-blooded, like salary man with like only no blood running through their veins, like the stoic image of a Japanese man especially was so kind of what people had known, that it was like a shock that these like grown adults, like high school baseball coaches, were like weeping. And I think it's like kind of like an extension of that. And I think whether it's for Japan or just in general, I think I choose to make documentaries to try to like baseline convey like everyone is human. And I think like this is, of course, it can be done in books and other forms, but I think this is a particular strength in the documentary medium. And I think teachers around the world, and especially in Japan these days, are getting kind of a bad rap, or like the media, like it's not newsworthy to be a good teacher. It's only newsworthy that you're being overworked and no one wants to be a teacher anymore and they're getting underpaid. And some, of course, there's always bad apples that create a bad reputation for the industry. So this is my attempt to, show the human side also. Teachers are overworked for sure, but so many of them feel such a joy to be there to guide kids to grow. This is why you get into teaching, and just kind of like shed light in a different way also of the profession. And I think, especially internationally, continuing to, it's true. I went to 30 schools to pick this one, and I interacted with thousands of kids. And of course, when you enter a school, it's like, feels like every school is the same. It's designed that way. The schools are designed like physically to look the same. The gymnasium is to, always to the right as you walk in, all these things. But, that's why as I spent the year there and tried to highlight some of these individuals, and there was 1,000 kids in the school, I think, trying to kind of highlight some of them to show the uniqueness of, they're all human, right? But at the same time, my role, I hoped, was to represent something universal. So I wasn't trying to pick special kids or special teachers or a special school. It's kind of like trying to convey some sort of, I don't want to say typical or common, but kind of that, right? Like so that people have some reference. And I hope I did my research to feel like this, to be qualified enough to present it that way. But for sure, always my goal is to just because I think this is the biggest issue in the world, just to get to like a broader thing, and especially for schools when you see parents fighting with teachers, or it's just like not good. Like I think we kind of forget that we're all human. And as I also actually got pregnant during the filming and gave birth shortly after filming this movie and editing with a newborn, now I'm a parent of a 3-year-old. I get like the parents' impulse to just like want to help your kid, and doing so kind of like, you know, doing whatever's necessary. I get that as well now, but I think, yeah, this is like if you think about actually what the kids need and what our societies need, just kind of like adults respecting each other as humans, I think is one big message I'm trying to do throughout my career. Yeah.
I really want to get into the filmmaking itself, because that is fascinating, and I think to everyone too. But one more question, because you brought up your son. Do you look at some of these things that happened and the things that you focused on in the film differently now that you're a mom? For example, the little girl crying, you just want to go out and grab her and take her away from that, right? Is it different now that you see from a mom's perspective?
I think no, well, not that particularly. I think I was her. I was Ayame. I was also the skipping rope prince. Like I was these, and then of course in the moment it's hard, but I hope and know at least now, 4 years later, I am as 11 years old, just finished sports day as one of their massive leaders as a 5th grader, and the skipping rope princes in high school, just like, I like to think thriving, kind of using these experiences as some life lessons. And I think it took me 15, 20 years to appreciate some of the hardships of my childhood, but it made me more resilient. And, especially those kids these days are being kind of chosen by the teachers. They know they can do more. It's no longer a time when everybody's being like scolded like that. They're kind of like observed and chosen. So for sure, like in the moment, I want them to be okay. But I think I come from like my parents' belief also that like, to have like roadblocks as a child just like sets you up better for adulthood. And I think to what degree is it too much? I think these are all legitimate conversations, but I think especially in Japan, it's also at a turning point. A lot of people thought some of that was too strict. Countries in Europe or like in France are like, oh, this happens every day, so the reaction also depends on, I think, what you're used to in your education system or how you think things should be. For me, I empathize more with like a few of the really difficult parents I had to deal with. I just realized now all they wanted was to make sure their kids were okay. They didn't really like hate me or anything as it, because it was like it's like, again, lots of parents. I empathize with that more now that I'm an actual parent, but kind of I think how I see the kids, and again, all the it's not like anybody was lashing out on anybody. These were like teachers discussing each move, how to support before and after certain things, and hopefully that some of that comes through. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I wanted to get a little bit into the filmmaking and how you conceptualize this. I was a Jet, so were a number of other people here today, actually. So we've had views of Japanese schools. My son also went to Yochen in Japan, and still, I didn't know any of that. I mean, you're there, you're watching, but you're not seeing. And you as a filmmaker are really focusing in. How did you decide to focus in on these particular students, and how did you go about, after you had all that footage, editing it down? What was that process?
Yeah, so in between the year of preparation and also COVID postponed the project for a year, and then I was editing for a year, and I was frequenting the school. We calculated that I spent like 4,000 hours in this school and its community over the course of a few years. We filmed 700 hours over the course of one school year, 150 days. So, so like 148 of those hours are like, 698 hours of that is like, you're just seeing the best of, I've filmed hundreds of math classes, hundreds of hiragana, like learning, like these are, because I knew that, the target was the incoming 1st graders and the outgoing 6th graders. It was either doing that or filming people for 6 years. I just wanted to show like how you start in school and how you end. But really, I filmed with many, many more kids and teachers than you see. And you don't know who, like the school is the main character. That was the whole goal. So you don't really know who's going to be in the film until you're editing and what happens on like the last day of school. Or, so there was a lot of I don't like people think, oh, that's so much waste. It's not waste. We just don't know which 90 minutes will be what ultimately you need, because you don't know what's going to happen. And the goal is to maintain the hundreds of relationships so that as things unfold, you're there and it's not just, not disrupting enough to be kicked out. You have the trust of everyone, and then you kind of sit with it and ultimately figure out how it's all balanced, like what I want to. Of course, I'm picking what moments go in. It's not, I think documentaries sometimes are called to be observational, and they are, but it's not like, a record of something. And it is, but I'm choosing, it's very subjective. I think if you watch a fiction film, you expect the director to have directed it. It's the same. I feel like it's kind of, but it's based off of, I try to kind of aim for like a condensed reality of my experience of it, at least. So you're getting the 90 minutes condensed from 4,000 hours of my perspective. And I think that's why it also takes a year to see how that lands. I do test screenings because I also don't narrate my film. And there are so many characters. I think often, especially in the West, people are much more used to a documentary that follows like one person, and it's much simpler. But it's okay if you don't get every scene. I think the feeling is that it's a collective school year. So these are things that I for sure had to work on. I think this type of film is very hard to make, which is why I love it. And it's a challenge. There's amazing books out there about Japanese education. People can speak about it. And I think I wanted to at least experience some version of it. And I think to make your own conclusions, or then go home or talk to your family or your community about what do we want for our kids. This is kind of my goal, to leave it open-ended while also directing you in some sort of direction. So it's not just like fully open, like a strike zone I'm aiming for. Yeah.
That is amazing. I think the real magic is, as you just described, the fact that everyone comes away with a different story in some ways. Like each one of you, I'm sure, Japanese, American, other, are looking at this and getting different things out of it. And I've seen it twice now, and I got different things out of the different, and I want to see it again. So do you have any thoughts of maybe doing a middle school or a high school sequel?
I get asked this all the time. I feel like I find this to be my sequel from the baseball film, and I think I'm doing a trilogy where I'll move on to adults in Japan next. Like what happens to us, the incoming 20-year-old and the outgoing 65-year-old of a Japanese big company, for example, is like an adult version of this that I'm in. In Japan these days, the difference between those generations' value systems is so intense. Rather than kind of sticking, although I've done a lot with education, for me, I think I went to elementary school. I think, as we raise our son in Japan, we have access to other systems. But I really think for this age group, it's not perfect. There are issues. But overall, again, for young kids, the Japanese system has a lot of benefits, and we plan to send our kid there. I can't really feel the same way from middle school onwards. I didn't do it, but I think the weaknesses of the issues of Japan are revealed more, I think, in the middle school system onwards, where you're a teenager wanting to be an individual, yet the system continues to really conform. And I think a lot of the things that work for first graders, feeling so much empathy for someone else as though they're yours, kind of starts to really clash with the forming of your own identity as a self and not in relation to the group. So I think, and I don't really make films about things that I don't make exposés, I don't go into it. I don't want to spend years, and there's also a lot of that already. So I think that's why I specifically don't imagine making a film about middle school. But I'm glad that, although I'm not an education expert, some of these things I saw, and now I kind of have a platform to, again, like, get people to, we don't have to keep all our education systems the same, like, for the next decade. So I think, again, continuing to actively think not just about elementary schools, but the whole program, like, how do you create adults, right? And here we are, like, a university also, where then they go to university. And so, and again, there's strengths and weaknesses in both Japanese universities and American universities. So I think this is something I like to think about. But for my film, I think I'm moving on, at least for these long forms, to adults. The hardest, I keep being told, it's impossible, just like this was impossible in the high school baseball and impossible. So I don't hope it doesn't take me 10 years, but I'm working on it. Yeah.
Well, the fruits of your labor are really incredible. And we do look forward to the one about adults. I know, so Stanford is never a shy crowd. There are lots of really amazing people in the audience who I'm sure have some incredible questions for you. So maybe we'll start with my Nichi Shimbun. You go. She is from my.
Hi, I'm Yuko from Japan. I saw your movie back in Japan too, so I'm very happy to see you today.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me ask you a few questions. What do you think are the potential drawbacks, like weakness of the Japanese education, especially for elementary school? And what do you think the United States can learn and should learn from Japanese education? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great. So I think, let me go backwards. I mean, whether it's the US or this film was on PBS here, also screened in many different countries in Europe. Finland, which I feel like we revere as this like a big education country, kind of advocating for, you know, individualism and kind of creativity and freedom. It was a big reaction there, I think, because they were like, oh, like these days we might have pushed it too far. We're having a lot of selfish kids that can do things for themselves but don't care enough about their community or others. And watching this film, the Finns were not like, oh, we want to copy this, but I think they said it was almost like a textbook for how to learn to live in a community, which I think, again, you know, in Japan, we get, you know, I think the word shudan, group, has become almost like negative in its own self. But when someone else says like, oh, it's like how you learn how to be part of a community, it kind of, you know, community, it feels a little bit nicer. And I think this is kind of an issue in a lot of places. In Japan, maybe the issue is the opposite, where again, it's like harder to be an individual in this conformist place. But I think kind of trying to take the essence, or, you know, the Japanese system is like practice to learn how to live with people. Like, this is what I tried to show in my film. I don't, again, have the science or math classes too much, because I think, you know, it's rare that a system expects the school to teach you that. Like, I think you go to schools, some schools in the US, and it's like, you don't expect, you certainly don't clean your own classroom. You certainly don't learn how to accurately serve your friend's lunch. It's mostly about academics. So now these days, all sorts of new education. And I think it's just kind of like, how do you live together? And I think this is to some degree what Japan is good at, to a degree. And something that I'm hoping, again, like, I think us also during COVID, when humanity was challenged, you know, some places did better than others, just to like, sometimes we just need to like work with each other, right? Like, think about people like beyond ourselves, because just being you being okay doesn't save you sometimes. So I think in this moment, when COVID for now is gone, in the past, just kind of these kind of skills, I think maybe Japan can at least like suggest. I think the drawback is like a double-edged sword, like the professor in the film says, where I feel like the great things of Japan and the bad things of Japan are side by side, and it's this flip of a coin, or the fine line where too much of that is and then it's difficult to be different, and there's, you know, we have bullying issues, or kids who don't feel comfortable in this situation don't come to school. You know, like, I couldn't include it in my film, but these days in middle and elementary and middle schools in Japan, almost 350,000 kids aren't coming to school like this year. So this is an increasing problem, and I think in this era of, you know, needing to cater to more individuals and trying to be diverse within our society, the school system is kind of like not adapting fast enough. Although I think that's come a long way since I was a child, where, you know, I would weep because I couldn't finish my lunch on time, and you know, this is not happening anymore. You don't have to finish your lunch if you're full. You know, you don't have to stand in the hall if, you know, you don't do what you broke a rule. It's a bit more humane. But so I think, you know, it kind of, again, how do you learn how to be yourself, not just in relation to the group, but like as yourself? I think in the US or in Western places, as a kid, you're asked like, who are you? You know, what do you like to do? What makes you unique? And maybe as you kind of get more competitive, you're asked like, what can you do better than the person next to you? Like, what is your advantage? You know, I think there's so little of that in Japan, at least in elementary school. I like it for 10-year-olds, but I think as you become 13, 14-year-olds, I think that's why, like, there's so many people in Japan that seem to struggle with a sense of self and feel so much obligation to how things will be received or how things will be seen, that it kind of is suffocating. And it's also part of the reason I left for college, right? Like, I'm not an exception in that. So I think some balance or somewhere in the middle. I think at least if we have comparison points, we can try to think how we can, what works for us or what works for your community or your family. Yeah.
So many questions. Another professor from Japan.
Thank you very much. I'm now visiting professor of the CDL, Center for Design Research, and I'm professor of KO University, and already talked to you and people about until 3 years ago, I was a principal of KO Elementary School. So yeah, again, thank you very much for creating this kind of movies. And I think this movie is very fantastic to know the cultural differences. And if possible, I want to ask you to have making of British and making of the Americans. So this is a very good, so understand cultural differences for the people. And so my question is that you already know the elementary school in Japan, but so you have so many times to create the movies. And so do you have any insight from Japanese elementary school as filmmakers?
Insights, meaning like something other people don't know. Okay. Well, just to go back to, I think there is like, I don't think anybody can make the making of an American. I'm not like maybe British. I think Japan is this, and I'm hoping that, you know, as a half Japanese person, that because constantly having to deal with this question as I grew up, like, are you Japanese, not Japanese? Like, this is kind of like, you can't avoid it. Sometimes I liked standing out, other times I didn't. And it was regardless, like this was part of my life. I feel like when I get a chance to explain the title, I just like to say that I feel like I get away with it because it's like, this is what I've dealt with in my life. And it's like almost not ironic, but I'm like actually posing this question versus, and Japan is still a country again, where, again, like I mentioned, so much is uniform. I don't think you could film one school and say, this is how an American is made. And then, and kind of my hope is in, I don't know, a few decades, as my Japanese son grows up as a 3/4 white guy who, you know, looks pretty much like a white person, but he's like born and raised and going to grow up in Japan. Like, you know, this title won't stand up, right? This is like too many versions of Japan in a way that is more inclusive. So I would say that I think I'm saying it at least in 2021. Like, I think this is kind of how it is, and things are changing quickly. I think as an insight, I mean, I really tried to share, I think especially the reaction in Japan is like parents being like, I never realized like teachers care so much. Like they're like in a school trip at night and they're drinking juice being like, how do we better, you know, to talk to our kids about like, you know, how strict should we be? Like, I think it's just like, you forget again about this, like the side of how much, you know, very few teachers are like there to try to do a bad job, you know, yet again, like that's kind of what stands out. And I think, and also like you saw with the teacher Endo, the shaved head, like some teachers don't always feel like they're doing a good job every day or every year. It's really hard. Even me I wasn't a teacher, but when you have the kids are brutal, right? Like they're like, especially like 5th grade, 6th grade girls. I thought I was a cool young person until like they, you know, so it's just so much work. And again, they're doing the hard work. And I feel like, you know, if there's issues at a school, the teachers are being overworked, like that's like a societal problem. And I think especially in Japan, this seems to be so little. As I work in media in Japan, people always like, oh, we don't really do programs about education because no one watches them. Like we can't get the ratings. And it's just like this lack of like, of course, if you're a parent, maybe you care about that year or something, but trying to get like to, you know, not leave it up to the education side that are doing a lot of what they can to improve things, but just like it's so disconnected. So I felt like my role is to, as someone who's not in education either, and find the education world also very, like the words they use, the language they speak is like, I don't understand what they're saying. Sometimes they're so like serious, katai, like very formal. So I'm trying to like maybe bridge that gap so that people understand like this is the future. Like this, for me, there's nothing more than education will shape our future, you know, and how not only what they're learning, but how they're learning things. So this is something that I definitely saw and hoping to share, yeah, as I do things like this. Yeah.
You know, so many other people would have looked at those 700 hours and put together that film that no one watched, but it's such a great film and everyone's watching it. It's also a great mechanism, maybe even for the Japanese government to think about teachers and use for teachers to think about teacher salaries in Japan, because that was never the case. Teachers were always revered, right?
Yeah.
And paid well and had a lot of support.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The goal is to use something that can be now used, right? I mean, again, even though I think the system has a lot of positives, like even if you don't, like this is, if you say, hey, this is why some kids can't come to school, look at how like you have to be this way or not, like it's a good use of it, you know, I think just to, because you can't, again, it's, this is unprecedented in a way to be allowed in so deeply to a public school. And not that I cause problems, but people are like, it's never gonna happen again, you know. So I feel like, again, like you use this again, that's why it's somewhat open-ended, so that people can hopefully use it as a tool, you know, like a reference. Yeah.
You go ahead.
Oh, the lady in the, near the mic, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was on the JET program a long time ago, so this took me way back. But my questions for you are the filmmaking process. First, how did you select? Can you talk a bit about your research, how you selected this particular school? When you went in, it was very observational. So how did you shoot without sort of being, you know, like dragging a big crew? Did you have a small crew? And then finally, what were the challenges? Can you share some of the challenges you faced in the course of sort of focusing on the school?
Yeah. So why I chose the school, you know, I got 29 no's and 1 yes, but I think in a way, the process, which again took 5 years, I was doing other things, but it took 5 years and 30 schools to find the right set of circumstances that allowed for this project. And as I went from school to school, I was noting what is the similar, you know. So again, I didn't want to pick a school that people will say, oh, this is like very unique, you know, because this is, again, especially for an outside audience, I want to emphasize, of course, it's the neighborhood, the city of Setagaya where I filmed is a way more well-off than an average neighborhood, but it's a public school away from, it's not like next to a station, it's kind of like middle of nowhere, like a suburb, I would say. And I wanted to make sure it had that feeling also, but I needed this, the principal and the people letting him in to want to do this, not just because the city was telling them to. And the principal of this school had really dedicated his life to, you know, really emphasizing these kind of like non-academic activities, like the human growth part. So I had kind of that support, although COVID messed things up. So by the time I was filming, that principal had moved on and I walked into a school with a different principal. But so that was kind of why I got in. I also, as I got a lot of no's and made my high school baseball film in the meantime, realized that I was getting a lot of no's because in Japan, things that have no precedent, it's really hard to get permission. Zenrei ga nai is like the easiest way to say no. And so, and the high school baseball film, I did it on the occasion of the 100th KOSHIEN tournament. That's kind of why we got in. And this gave us the idea to also find a special occasion. And it was the Tokyo Olympics. And the city of Setagaya was going to host the US Olympic team. And we just thought, at least then maybe some, because my husband is an American, he's the producer of this film, and our connections to the US, at least I thought maybe they'd listen to our idea about like kind of showcasing one of their schools abroad in this year, even though the Olympics had very little to do with the film. And that's how we got in. And so these set of circumstances, and the mayor and the educational board liking that idea. We were there from the first day of school. So the first graders didn't know that school didn't mean being filmed. I think this is like a big reason that there was no like freaking out about the camera. They walked in, they were so nervous, they didn't know what to expect. And it was like, okay, here's your desk, here's your chair, here's a camera, you know, here's a microphone, you know, here's your teacher, here's Emma. Like it was, they didn't know any different. I like to joke that they became second graders and we stopped filming and they must have been like, where's the camera, you know? This is, we couldn't fool the other grades, but this is, and then we were there not every day, but almost every day, to the point where I don't believe anybody can become like air, but it's just so part of the environment. And especially with the kids, you know, then you get the kids who are comfortable over time, less comfortable, and that's how you don't continue to film the kids that are very distracted by the camera all the time. You just kind of adjust, and eventually you figure out which parents have the right type of support. Not too eager, because I couldn't promise any kid also to be in the film, but of course needed the permission to have the kids that I wanted in the film. And so this type of a process, and then you could have a great kid with great parents, and something had to happen to them. So you kind of then have a list, and again, because it wasn't a film that relied on one kid, or it's almost like in the summer break, because school starts in the spring, I would review all the footage and know what I had, know what I didn't have, and continue on. So it was a lot of review process as I went. and there was 4 first grade classes and 5 sixth grade classes. So I constantly had, I could walk into any classroom and a lot of choices. So the challenges, I mean, they're endless, but I would just say, for me, it was kind of like upping the batting average of being in the right place at the right time to capture something that might unfold, which if you don't know what's going to happen, it's really hard to do. And I watch my film sometimes and almost I get upset at the things I saw with my own eyes, but couldn't capture, because it is really hard to be there with the perfect shot and with the perfect audio. This is the hardest part. School is amazing. Kids are amazing. Amazing things are happening all the time. Like teachers are being incredible all the time. It's just like my job to cinematically capture. It's not about me whipping out an iPhone. I picked out my crew after a few years of research to find the right team. 1 camera person, 1 sound person, pretty much, that would be perfect for this. And so it's a lot of those combinations, and then just kind of just being there, low stress, kind of like being adults that the kids like to be around, and then and say, hey, we're not going to talk to you during class. We can play with you during break, but so no kids are talking to you, even though we're in the class. And just trying to do that every day and trust the process that eventually the first graders will become second graders, and you'll have a series of stories that capture what it's like to go to a school in Japan. This is I know it's kind of vague, but this is kind of, and then just to be able to maintain the relationships every day, that you're not kicked out somehow, because you again, there's a lot of people that are around, and just to have like the relationship with the teachers and the parents and the kids that, even if something happens, it's not going to destroy the project. You have a chance to, kind of work through something, so that you're there on graduation day, you're there on the next, the performance day. I was holding my breath until that day, because without an ending, the whole year wouldn't have made sense. So
I think we have time for one more
it's like a very long answer. Yeah.
from a student.
Oh.
Thank you so much for the film. I've been wanting to watch this for a long time, so thank you. You touched on a little bit about how you cut down from 600 or 700 to like cut down to 699, but I'm curious about how you went about going from the long film to the short film, or if you started with the long film first and went to the short film, and like what the distinct messages are for the 2 films.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of overlap, but what are some of the differences you focus on for each?
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I know that maybe some of you have even seen Instruments of a Beating Heart. That was the New York Times version. It's shorter, features Ayame and the audition process. So as I filmed this, when you put together a film, you kind of like, you need partners like for funding and also outlets. So I intended to film and make this film, but along the way, not just New York Times, but finished the TV network in Finland or France. So they kind of join, and it's called co-producing. And in return for some funding, we kind of promised them a version of the film. And New York Times, they only make shorts. And actually, when I was filming this school year, this was what I had in mind. But when Ayame and that story happened, immediately I was like, this has to be a separate film. It's almost like a similar goal, but in a more maybe digestible form for a mass audience, where it's kind of that singular story that covers a lot of the themes I was interested. But it's, again, like I'm at peace that even though the feature is what's harder, that in my life, like nothing will be seen more than that short, that the Instruments of Beating Heart, and it's okay. I also like it, that's amazing. But so kind of like realizing there's different audiences for different lengths. The goal is very similar, although I feel like the short is more dramatic and kind of emphasizes, like more of like the strictness and kind of resilience of a person, rather than just showing like the system. So I really hope that eventually, and as the film, I'll just say, I think it's because we're towards the end, this film is, will by mid-November be on Amazon for like anybody to watch in the US. I'm hoping that if people are interested, like they'll see the short and want to watch more. But this is kind of how it came about. And I thought, why not? And again, it was one of the most watched New York Times documentaries ever made. So again, if my goal is like, why do I make films? I wanted to just be, for the couple of tens of thousands of people who like willing to watch a 100-minute film, or just like, and I went for like, hey, I want to people to care about education, even if it's for 30 minutes. And I think that's kind of how the New York Times version, I made them at the same time because I knew that was happening, and got to include a lot of scenes in the short film that isn't in this film to kind of flesh out that process. But also, yeah, I had to keep her for the main film too, because I maybe some of you know, I took Ema to the Oscars with me this spring, and it was she's 10, 11 years old now, and she wants to be an actor. So I just thought that was at least, to kind of like, showing her a bit of, she got to hang out with all these actors, actresses, and really fun for me. So yeah, but that's kind of how the two films came about.
Ema, you're so influential. It's so amazing what you've done. And especially in modern times where we're teaching more and more by visual and audio and less about reading books, that what you're doing is the future of teaching. And it's so exciting to have you here. And we do hope you'll come back. And when you're an Oscar nominee, don't forget us. Not a nominee, a winner. When you win next, don't forget us, because we know you're going great places. Thanks so much for the time. If you have another couple seconds, I think some other people would talk to, but let's give a big hand.
Oh, thanks. And thank you very much.